Welcome to CivilNet. My guest is Jenny Paturyan, who specializes in democratization, civil society, corruption, and research methodology. She is a professor at the American University of Armenia. Thank you for joining us, Mrs. Paturyan.
Thank you for the invitation.
So today is a decisive day for Armenia. People are heading to the polls to elect their next government. Do you agree that these elections are decisive for the country, and if so, why?
Yeah, these elections are very important. Probably as important as elections in the early 90s, and maybe even more important, because I think it's the first time. I think it's the first time in our history when we have a combination of freedom to choose and a number of political parties to choose from. So that kind of a combination, I think it's unique, because the few times when we did have free elections, we would usually have a clear forerunner. So it was kind of clear what's going to happen. Now it's not clear what's going to happen. And yeah, the stakes are very high. I think the next government is going to have a huge impact on the direction the country will take.
So many opinion polls estimate that the frontrunners of these elections are Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and second President of Armenia, Robert Kocharyan. What does this imply about the public's current attitudes?
Well, first, I want to use the wording like that you just used and point out that one thing that it shows is that politics is hyper-personified. We think about individuals instead of thinking about teams. And that is happening in the world. That is a known fact. In Armenia, that is, of course, multiplied by 10. So people are very fixed on individuals. They're looking for saviors, unfortunately, and that's sad, because regardless of who wins, there is no savior. That's a fake concept. No person single-handedly can pull Armenia out of the crisis. In fact, the more we stay focused on persons, the deeper the crisis is going to be, because countries are governed with teams, not with people. And yeah, let me repeat, there are no saviors. That's just not right. What else does it tell us? It tells us that there is a certain group. First of all, another thing that I'm personally most concerned about, and I don't hear anyone else talking about it, it's not just Kocharyan Pashinyan, it's the rural population against the Yerevan population, because Pashinyan's support is stronger in the villages, Kocharyan's support is strongest in Yerevan, and the other cities are kind of in between. And I might be mistaken, but I think it's the first time we're seeing that kind of cleavage in Armenia. Before, there were preferences for different teams and people, but they were not, the villagers would have been as divided as the people in here. And this, I seriously dislike. And I'm worried about that more than anything else, because that kind of cleavage, it's potentially rife with deeper conflicts. And what I'm also really, really worried about is that every group calls the other one's names. And excuse me, that's inappropriate, particularly in Yerevan. Maybe because I'm from Yerevan, I've never heard a villager say something ugly about people from Yerevan. Maybe because they don't want to say it in my presence. But people in Yerevan think, I'm educated on this and that. That's nonsense, yeah? That needs to stop. You have to treat every citizen of Armenia with utmost respect, regardless of where they live, what their level of education is. So this entire narrative, it's on both camps, that the other camp is brainwashed, but it bothers me how people in Yerevan talk about people in the rural areas. It's just completely inappropriate. So that bothers me, and I don't see anyone else talk about it, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. So that's one cleavage that it's there. Another one is, of course, is this narrative of the past and present and future. And yes, I think we were all excited about Velvet Revolution. Yes, I think there is a lot of people that got disappointed. But some haven't, and they still see Pashinyan as the only person who can carry it through. And that is why you see that cleavage between the village and the city, because Pashinyan keeps talking about redistribution, about recapturing stolen assets, and that's a talk that's very uncomfortable for rich people, clearly. He has certain anti-elitist elements in his speech, and whether it's good or bad is a different question. The remark he made about education during the debate, I thought was, again, one of those remarks when he said the elite destroyed the schools so that only the elite can benefit from education. That was, again, along those same lines of why his support is so strong in the villages. No, it's not because the villagers are brainwashed. Let's please quit that conversation once and for all. If anyone feels the impact of war, poverty, economic downturn, it's first the villages. So, if anyone has suffered, it's them more. It's interesting that there the support is still strong. And then, of course, this whole component of war and lost war, and Kocharyan is seen as a strong man, and there is this hope that, we need a strong leader to, overcome the adversities, so there, that support is there.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the 2018 elections following the Velvet Revolution that led to Nikol Pashinyan, you talked about that, that led to Nikol Pashinyan's rise to power were considered transparent and fair by election observers back then? There is a worry that this time things would be different. In that respect, how do you evaluate these elections? And why is there this fear compared to the 2018 elections?
Right. I think two reasons. One is that in 2018, again, it was kind of clear who's going to win, right? There were kind of, the question is how many seats would the other parties gather, but we knew that the country is headed for, a big victory for Pashinyan's team. Now it's not clear, right? And so the higher the tension, the higher the worry, understandably. Nothing's wrong with that. I think a certain healthy dose of worrying is actually good. And people are kind of watchful, it's good. The more citizens are watchful on the election day, the better. The harder it is then to do fishy things. Don't be paranoid, please. But the second and even more important reason is, again, that the stakes are very high, not only because it's not clear, who's going to win, but also because the two big camps have exchanged almost open threats, right? And in Pashinyan's case, he tried to, put Kocharyan behind bars. Although Kocharyan said he's not going to retaliate, there is that fear because, again, he's perceived as a strong man kind of person who doesn't quite tolerate other people's opinion, has a very strong mind of his own. So the concern is, and again, I repeat, I heard him say he's not going to retaliate. He made that clear. But the concern is that he will. So, and not only he, but his team, right, will retaliate. So those who, support Pashinyan, they fear the return of the, politics a la Kocharyan, repressions, human rights disrespect, not much freedom of press and things like that. And so when the stakes are high, naturally the losing side is trying to, it's a known phenomenon, right? And that's why we say democracy is better than authoritarian regime, because in a working democracy, there is a democratic bargain that says, okay, if you lose, I'm not going to touch you. While the loser says, okay, if I lose, I'm going to congratulate you. So the entire question in Armenia right now, today and tomorrow, will the democratic bargain be upheld? And that's and because Armenia has not much history of upholding democratic bargain, especially under such conditions, that's where the concern comes from, right? Do we have that culture of the loser accepting the loss and congratulating the winner, and the winner not retaliating? We don't have that kind of culture. This has only happened once it happened in 1990 when Levon Petrosyan got elected. In Soviet Union, of all places, we had free elections. And that was the only free elections we ever had until 2018, where again the democratic bargain was upheld, but not much was at stake. Now a lot is at stake.
So I know it's a tough question, but in your opinion, which is the most plausible scenario to see which the Armenia alliance winning or having a lot of votes, or the civil contract party having much of the votes? What are the most plausible scenarios according to you? Or would it be a coalition or a second round? People talk about this. The situation is really uncertain now. So what do you think it is plausible?
It is uncertain. I have seen some of the polls, but the margin of error is so large that I wouldn't risk predicting which of the two big teams will get more votes, but I would, predicting in Armenia is a fool's errand, especially now, but I would risk making a prediction that I don't think any single team will get a majority in the first round. That means six days in which they either form a coalition or we go into a second round. Now, again, based on what the leaders of the two big blocs have said, it looks like they're both would rather prefer a second round. It looks like, but who knows? This is completely new for them as well. Tomorrow they will have to be looking at the numbers, just like all of us, and thinking, okay, are there any? And this is all so new that even political science folks are not entirely clear on all the details. But from what I know, a coalition can only be 3 players. That means they can't get like 10 parties together to form a coalition, from what I know. And that means they have to look if they have enough other big players they could join with and form a coalition. And they're probably, Kocharyan's chances are higher because the Prosperous Armenia and the I Have Honor Alliance probably would rather line up with the Armenia bloc rather than with civil contract. We will see. And I would very much like to see a coalition, to be honest, as a political scientist, because I think a coalition is a good thing. It forces them to compromise, it forces them to moderate their rhetoric. That's how parliamentary systems are supposed to. That's how they work worldwide. But in Armenia, we have this unique clause that calls for a second round. And I think they're going to go for a second round. And there things become even less predictable. Because if we have a second round between Kocharyan and Pashinyan, and here again, I myself am using names because that's what it is, then most of the votes are not going to be for, most of the votes are going to be against. We already have that. The absurdity of the situation, well, maybe not absurdity, the reality of the situation is that a lot of people who are going to vote for Armenia Alliance vote because they deeply dislike Pashinyan personally. They're annoyed, they can't see him, they think him as a traitor, this, that. A lot of people that are going to vote for the civic contract are going to vote because they fear the return of Kocharyan personally. So that is kind of not very healthy, I have to say, because if you get votes, you should be relying on people who support you and your team rather than, oh, I hate that other guy, so I'm going to vote for you. But that's what we have in Armenia. Hyper-personalized, hyper-emotional.
Yeah, this is a situation that they created themselves. So, you're voting.
To some extent, yes. But also, I think it's, as you say, one of the things I study is political culture in civil society and things like that. To some extent, said it as it is, it's understandable. We are a very young, we're not even a democracy yet. 30 years is nothing, right? So this is because of the certain underdeveloped type of political culture. And if you look at Britain, when it just created its parliament, it was like that most likely. There were lords who were personalities, and that's what it is. That's what we have. We have a long way to go before we learn to control our emotions and to shift away from persons. And that might not even happen because in the entire world, in the entire developed democratic world, they went through stages of going from persons to teams and parties and ideologies, and now they're at the stage of issues, and that is eroding, and they're getting to the stage of persons again. We didn't have all that. We are either here persons or we're here persons, I don't know where, but we might not even have a chance to develop a 20th century European style politics with parties and platforms and things like that. We don't know.
And so some fear, you said that there is a black and white. We used to say that people from the city are this side, the people from the villages are from this side, and that created polarized situation between the citizens of Armenia. Some fear civil clashes between supporters of different political forces when the results are final. Is this likely, and if so, to which degree is it possible?
Well, is it likely? I'm afraid it's likely. I find it, I want to believe that it's not going to happen because this is where us being a small nation, tightly knit, comes into play. We've come to the brink of that several times over the past 30 years and somehow always pulled back last moment, remembering that, the person on the other side might be your relative, cousin, whatnot, a friend, a neighbor. I hope we're going to be wise enough not to get into things. There's been incredibly tense moments in the past half a year, but even so, I think the worst that happened is that someone threw a bottle into the other crowd, and already at that time, some news sources were saying clashes have started, and thank God, so don't believe everything is on social media. Don't rush to the scene to defend your side. I think if we all just step back and just exercise restraints, we might be able to keep that to a minimum. And I certainly hope that the political leaders will exercise caution and understand how much is at stake. So I personally am planning to stay home for the next couple of days, just not to be out there. And then I think, let's just try to avoid clashes. Some of the rhetoric both sides were using is unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but remember that this will pass. Whoever wins, this will pass, and you'll have to deal with people who supported the other side, and they're human, and they have a right to have their opinions. So I hope it's not happening. I mean, I'm not very worried, to be honest. I'm somewhat worried, but I'm not thinking, oh my God, we're gonna start fighting each other. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not, but so you think that even if something happens, it's gonna be very short, or?
That's what I think, yeah. That's what I think, because that's what has been happening in the past. There's been, cases of people getting beaten up or something being broken, and that, or March 1st, people lost their lives, and that kind of sends a chilling wave over people, oh, okay, we've gone too far. So while this might happen, I hope it won't escalate, because, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for this talk.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you for watching, and continue to follow CivilNet.
Okay.